Hey, everybody, good morning. They're going to make me sit here so that the camera can see me for the folks who are here on WebEx. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Lee Hoffman, and I am currently the chair of our steering committee for this group. As is our tradition, for those of you who don't remember, let's go around the room, introduce ourselves and where we're from. We're going to start with our fearless leader, Marcy, and go around the room that way to make something different this time.
Good morning. Nice to see everybody's faces instead of through a video camera. Marcy, CBIA.
I'm John Blair, I'm a lobbyist at CBIA, and I help with White. Marc.
Winter Cry, senior engineer with Command Corporation. Tom Salmonito, the rural engineering.
Actually, taking CBIA, I cover the environment side of conservation.
Morning, I'm Christy Prescott. I'm the Director of Wholesale Power Contracts at United Illuminating.
David Giordano with Tucson Fuel Cell America.
Samantha Grover, Environmental Supervisor at Forest Steel. Amber Chauncey from ERM Consulting. Lacey Duara, State Policy Director for Dominion Energy.
Jason Barron, Clean Energy in Middletown.
Mark Bobman with Bristol Resource Recovery, Waste Energy Facility in Bristol.
Andy Harris with DHP, I'm here in Buzzford.
Harold Blinderman, Dave Pitney, and it's good to see everybody in person.
Kathy Bloodfield, Brandwood Container Board in Montville.
Outstanding. We do have folks that are on the WebEx, but I don't know how we would reasonably introduce them. If you're here in person, if you would sign in, and maybe we'll kick that around so that folks who haven't seen it get to sign in. The big announcement that I have is next month, we will still be in person per Harold's notation, but we will not be here. We will be at the Hartford Club in slightly fancier digs as befits a commissioner of the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. She will be our keynote for the March meeting, so please make every effort to attend that one, particularly in person, because I think the Q&A will be robust. We've asked her to talk about exactly what the Hell Deep's going to do in light of the numerous departures, particularly within their more seasoned professional ranks. We won't have Jan Chachatka to kick around anymore in a week. Ozzie Inglesi has announced he is retiring as well. I know that folks who do water permitting will be sad to hear that. And there are many, many other retirements, and how the department's going to look 4 or 5 months from now is anybody's guess, but hopefully the commissioner can fill us in on that. Are there any other announcements for the good of the order? Did I miss anything? Okay, so with that, I'd like to introduce Brian Rice, who is here with us virtually, given the wind, rain, storm, and everything else. As everybody knows, people who work for public service companies and utilities have double duty in storms, and so Brian had to work remote. Christy Prescott, who some of you may remember when she ran this organization with an iron fist, as Christy Bradway, but she, like Kanye into Ye or Diddy into Puffy, has changed her name, but she's still an artistic genius, and she's here with us live. And they're going to talk about the successor to the very successful LREC-ZREC program that we've had in this state for a long time. It's now the Non-Residential Renewable Energy Solutions Program, so it has an even longer name, but it's going to be fantastic. And Brian and Christy will talk about that, and I will get out of here.
I need to go up there.
You do, because that's where the camera is. I'm going off.
Cameras of Mercy. Got it.
Yep.
All right. Hi, everybody. Nice to see you again. If you have any hard questions, ask Brian, and anything easy I will take. Brian and I decided to co-present this because the programs are jointly run by Eversource and United Illuminating. And so we've developed the programs together. And so if you don't like it, it's Eversource's fault. And everything you like, again, is United Illuminating. As Lee mentioned, there have been a lot of changes the LREC ZREC program, the Low Emission and Renewable Energy Credit Program, reached its conclusion after 10 years. That was a REC-only program, which we were just purchasing the off-taking energy or the renewable energy credits from those products, and the projects were located behind the meter. And so projects were compensated for energy basically by avoided energy values, and they were able to participate in our net metering programs for the excess energy. That changed with the onset of Public Act 1850 and successor 1935, which modified the programs. And so Brian will kick off this discussion a bit to talk about our NRES program, non-residential renewable energy solutions, and he'll talk about that. And then we also thought we would tell you a little bit about an ongoing program, which was also part of Public Act 1935, which was the Shared Clean Energy Facility, or SCEF program, which is currently in its third year of procurement, and there's an active procurement now. So we thought we'd tell you a little bit about that and just jump right in. So Brian.
Thank you. Yeah, just by way of introduction, so I'm Brian Rice. I'm Director of Customer Solar Programs at Eversource. And I've been with Eversource for just over 11 years now, and I've had the opportunity to work on solar programs in a variety of ways, as well as other things at the company. But I also have to provide the disclaimer that in my current job, I'm about 6 weeks in. And really the person that probably should have been here presenting to you was Laura Purbeck, the manager of these programs for Eversource, but she was unable to make it, so you get me instead. And I'll welcome Christy to keep me honest and correct me if I get anything mistaken as I'm myself getting up to speed on these programs. But I will say it's, you know, I've been fortunate to work on solar across New England for the past decade, and it's really been interesting to see how the various programs have evolved as the solar markets matured. And I think this is the latest of those evolutions for Connecticut. So we're excited to get this next chapter rolled out and supporting the renewable market in Connecticut. So Marcy, if you want to go to the next slide. And we'll kind of move through these slides somewhat informally, so you can keep going. Again, I think Christy touched on this, that the NRES, as it's referred to, program is really the successor to the LREC ZREC programs and net metering programs as part of the ongoing evolution of solar in Connecticut. One thing that's important is, you know, the policies still largely are intended to support projects that are sized to on-site load. So really intended to support opportunities for on-site solar generation. And that's what many of the projects will be providing. Although there are also opportunities for models consistent with what's often referred to as virtual net metering, where excess production from a facility can be allocated and the value distributed to other customers, in this case through beneficial accounts for what we'll talk about later, state, agricultural, and municipal customers. Next slide, Marcy, please. Again, I think Christy touched on kind of the legislative background for this, but kind of other important features of the program. As with past programs, this really provides a long-term source of predictable revenue to support financing of these resources. There's projects that are accepted into the program will be eligible to receive predictable compensation on a tariff-based mechanism for 20 years. It also accommodates different configurations of solar energy use. We'll talk about buy-all and netting, and what those terms really refer to is the configuration of the solar facility in relation to the on-site load. You know, customers have the option to really set up their solar facility so it exports 100% of what it produces back to the electrical grid, and the customer receives a predictable fixed payment for that quantity. The exact same dollars per kilowatt hour throughout, or megawatt hour throughout the 20 years. There's another option though that customers can choose, and that's the netting tariff. In that instance, the customers are able to use energy first to offset their own usage and reduce or avoid electric charges at the prevailing retail rate, and then export anything in excess of that onto the grid and receive net credit for that, while at the same time receiving another, again, fixed predictable payment, but just for the kind of renewable energy attribute. So kind of an incentive payment for a REC. I think most of this audience probably has a good concept of what a REC is, I expect. So the companies will be procuring 300 megawatts through this program over 6 years, 50 megawatts per year, with those amounts divided up between UI and Eversource, with Eversource contracting for the larger portion of that as the utility serving a larger portion of load. Next slide. This is somewhat repetition, but the program is eligible to facilities that are greater than 25 kW and less than 2 megawatts. So that covers a pretty sizable portion of the market and is typical of commercial solar installations. We'll touch on bid prices a little bit later, but the program is further segmented into medium, large, and small zero emission resources, again, consistent with LREC, ZREC, and low emission resources, all of which are treated somewhat differently and have somewhat different criteria attached to them. Projects that are selected will have 3 years to get built and operating. And then, as we said, once they're in service, they have the benefit of fairly predictable revenue streams for the next 20 years. Next slide. Here's how the capacity is divided up by categories between zero and low emission resources and utilities. And we can move on to the next slide. Yeah, and here's just more detail about eligibility and some repetition, but I'm glancing myself to see if there's any new items. But one thing that's important, and this has always been the case with renewable programs, is kind of site segmentation. And in this case, there's one bid accepted per project site, per technology. Next. Here is the pricing for the program. As I indicated, the buy-all structure, in which you get a fixed payment for just 100% of the output, is capped at $200.97 per megawatt hour for the medium, large, and low emission categories. Of course, actual pricing will depend on the results of competitive solicitations. So we hope it'll be less than that. And then facilities can, if they choose to consume power on site, as well as receive credit for just the energy that's exported to the grid, then they'll be eligible to receive up to $95.75 per megawatt hour for the renewable attribute. And again, we're hoping actual pricing for the medium, large, and low emission categories will ultimately be less than that. Small emission resources, which are resources up to 200 kW, are eligible to enroll at a fixed price on a first come, first served basis. Those facilities aren't required to seek eligibility through a competitive solicitation. And the early applicants that are accepted into the program will receive a rate equal to the ceiling price. Next slide. On the competitive solicitation, there are bid preferences intended to support those resources that have other desirable attributes, specifically resources located on brownfields or landfills, or resources located in a distressed municipality. And that list of distressed municipalities is based on list from a DECD, I believe, I have the acronym right. And then what it is just that for those bid preferences, the bid price will be favorably adjusted as we factor that into the competitive solicitation and what projects are ultimately selected.
Just on that point, it's actually the bid evaluation, not the bid price. So ultimately, if you bid $100, we would evaluate your bid at a lower rate. So when we stack the bids, we would stack it and it would jump up in the stack at a lower price. But if you were selected, you'd be paid at your bid price. Sorry, Brian.
Yep. I think we're getting to the end for NRES anyway. So next slide. And this is just more on the tariff administration, which we've talked about a bit. Again, 20-year term provides a long-term predictable source of revenue for projects. REC payments for those, whether it's a all-in payment under the buy-all tariff or just the renewable attribute payment under the netting tariff, will be based on gross actual system production. And payments will be made on a quarterly basis in line with the schedule for the NEPOOL generation information system minting of renewable attributes. And then netting incentives will be really kind of mostly similar to net metering and with credits provided on a monthly billing cycle. And then, the companies, consistent with prior programs, will be requiring a revenue grade meter so we can accurately and efficiently measure the output of these facilities that we're providing compensation to under the tariff. And then, as indicated before, that 20-year term, really any purchase obligations start when the project is operational. Next slide. All right. So both companies, are actively administering this program now. It launched February 1st. We're looking forward to getting our first year of bids in and evaluating them this spring. And any questions you have about the RFP can be directed to the company at the email addresses here. So I'm happy to pause for questions on NRES, or we can go straight into SCEF. I don't know, Chris, do you have a preference, or if the group does?
Maybe I'll give a couple of other points regarding NRES, and then we'll jump into SCEF, and then maybe I'll present SCEF in a way that shows you what's different and why there are different programs. Just to build on what Brian presented, and thank you, Brian. Just a couple of key points. LREC Zurich, as I mentioned, we started was REC only, renewable energy credit purchase, 15-year long-term contract, very popular. We had a lot of participation. That program was enabled by Public Act 1180, extended a few times. It was originally supposed to run 6 years, but there were some, reasons to extend that. And in the meantime, while we were developing this new program, LREC Zurich has finished after year 10. And this successor program kind of melds 3 different separate programs that were administered by the utilities in different groups. And so there's a bit of learning, so be gentle with us. It's a little bumpy because our wholesale power contracts manage the renewable energy certificates. The rates and billing organizations used to manage the net metering piece and providing the credits on your bill. And then there was another group that managed a virtual net metering queue that was enabled based on other legislation. And so now they've combined kind of all 3 programs into one. And so it's confusing. If you read those program rules, and I tried really hard, they are really confusing. If you read them, I have to say it may be difficult for you to figure out what the answers are because there are a lot of layers. And so we've tried really hard. We've had 4 or 5 different bidder webinars and information. We have Q&As, we have tools, but I will say that this program and the application and the materials that you have to submit with your RFP are more than what a lot of folks are used to because you're having to provide a lot of different information. The LREC program didn't require that you cite your project to size it to load. The new program, you have to size to load. That was legislatively mandated, and the utilities are trying to figure out how to provide as much flexibility as we can and validate and also allow for build out, for future build out. So it's kind of, it's a little bit complicated. You have to set a baseline, then you have to allow folks to go out for 5 years, for future beneficial electrification for electric vehicles or air source heat pumps and there are a lot of details there. So if anybody has questions, we're happy to answer them. And again, I mentioned virtual net metering. It's no longer called virtual net metering. It's now called SAM, State Agricultural Municipal. So virtual net metering used to allow state agricultural and municipal participants. Now they don't call it virtual net metering, although it's virtually net metering. It's called the SAM aspects. And so projects can bid into this competitive procurement, but only SAM projects in this program don't have to size to load. Your customer host doesn't have to have load, because you wouldn't imagine they would, or they could, but you might be able to be on a municipal, piece of property that doesn't have any load and allocate that to beneficial accounts. And so it's kind of merging all those, and those projects are also competing with other commercial projects and also the size tiers. So I will pause because I know I just said a lot, but I just want you to know that it is a big program. It's merging, again, three different separate programs. And then at the same time, there is a residential companion program called the RRES, which is also open, and that opened January 1st, that both the EDCs are administering for residential customers. And also, if you're a residential, but you're over 25 kilowatts, you have to participate in the non-residential. We went through a lot of naming problems with that. We understand there's an exception there. And then if you want to not have load, but get a long-term contract, say you have a piece of vacant property where you want a long-term contract for, you can't participate in the NRES unless you're SAM, but you can participate in the Shared Clean Energy Facility Program. SCAF, you got all my acronyms? I'm going to do a quiz. Lee, you got them?
I do.
I know you do. He's the only one. Derek might have them. He's got them now. So sorry, I just wanted to kind of lay that groundwork a little bit before I jump into Shared Clean Energy, because there's a lot. And the other point is that it's an active procurement. These are competitively procured. You'll be compared to other bidders that qualify in your size tier. And the bids are open until March 14th, I believe. Is that right? Thank you. And for the year one. And Brian had mentioned that and there was a kind of a caveat on one of the slides that says for the year one, we're only running one procurement. For years 2 through 6, we were told by PURE to run 2. And so we'll still be working on that. PURE will open another docket to talk about what went well, what we need to improve on, and modify the schedules, which will probably kick off maybe early fall, I think, based on where I think we are in timeline.
Chrissy, can I ask a question before you get to the SCIP?
Yeah.
This issue that's slightly different between Eversource and UI on the interconnection queue, that seems to be a little confusing to everybody. And I don't know if it applies to everybody. It only applies to new construction projects. I know the solar guys are a little upset about that right now. There's a couple of complaints, but could you explain that a little more detail right now? What UI requires with regard to 2 weeks before the bids are due?
Yes. Brian? No, just kidding. So what David is referring to is that there's an online bid portal to submit bids for Eversource and UI service territory, but there are separate bid portals. Because Eversource evaluates bids in their service territory, we evaluate bids in our service territory. Eversource built their bid portal on their existing LREC bid portal, so it kind of feels comforting to folks who are used to the prior 10 years. UI, our bid portal was retired, and we couldn't use it for this year. Fun. And so we in an effort to provide as much commonality for bidders who ultimately have to get through the interconnection queue anyway, because all these projects have to get interconnected, and to provide some efficiencies for bidders and for our customers, so we didn't have to build out another bid portal. We chose to use the interconnection bid portal. And there are interconnection questions that are asked of all bidders in the bid portal design, which surprised some bidders who weren't used to providing that information at this stage of the application process. And there were some emergency motions filed with PURA last week, and we filed a response on Monday, which we provided clarification that for bidders who are not what we call new construction, and I can touch on that in a moment, they can answer not applicable at this time, NRES application. And if you want to look at our response, I believe it is
No, I didn't.
motion 25 emergency response that we provided.
What I wasn't clear on was whether it was for everybody or only some of the people that were bidding into the small zero.
It is for everyone. It's just that there's a different window. There's what we call all the bids, Eversource and UI, whether you are small, medium, or large, or LREC, participating in this RFP can submit bids until March 14th in the RFP. What we recognized for the small category is that projects that are under 200 kilowatts per the program rules and from the decision from PURA is that they are price takers. They don't bid competitively. So if you think about all the bids come in on March 14th, could there be some advantage to perhaps a larger developer or someone who had more staff and had more time or had more of an opportunity to get into the queue first? And so we had talked about that, and it's a carryover from how we administered the LREC-ZREC or the small ZREC program. So what we considered is a 2-week window from the time we open the bid portal on February 1st to February 14th. We consider all the bids that come in for the small category, the bid price takers, as coming in at the same time. So it's a little bit of fiction, but we've created it, and we've acknowledged why we created that, which is to provide what we figured was an equal opportunity for small bidders. However, those bidders can continue to bid until the 14th of March. And so the EDCs are both evaluating their 2-week window queue right now. If at the close of the 14th, if we had more bids than we could take on the 14th, because of the first come, first serve, we would run a random selection. I do not have intel right now whether or not we are at that point, but I hope to have that. And I can't speak for Eversource on their queue.
Yeah, I mean, we're still kind of sifting through our queue, and so we've gotten a question, and I'll say this to this group in case somebody's thinking about it. You know, if you have a 200 kW or less project that you're thinking about putting an application in or putting a bid in, put it in. Don't assume that, oh, you missed your window because it's past the 14th. I would encourage everybody to put the application in, because it is first come, first serve. And you know, who knows, even if we had more projects that apply, once we start sifting into them, we might discover that a lot of them don't meet all the eligibility requirements and we can't accept them. So if you're thinking about putting in an application for a small project, please put it in.
And David had just mentioned something for new construction. What we consider new construction, there's a whole definition in the program rules. But if you're in that case, make sure you give us a call if you have any questions. But new construction projects, meaning you don't have any on-site load, you don't have any history, you're a brand new customer, you do have to submit the interconnection information. So any other questions on NRES, this exciting topic of non-residential renewable solutions program, renewable energy solutions? See, I'm tripping over it. No questions on NRES? No? All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about another acronym, Shared Clean Energy Facility, SCEF. We are in year 3 of 6 years of procurement to SCEP. And so, Marcia, can you go a few slides? Yep, okay. So again, you'll see that Public Act 1850 is mentioned here. And it talks about a number of dockets. Public Act 1850 was the original legislation. It was also modified in Public Act 1935. And PURA opened a number of dockets. It started with 1907-01. Currently for year 3 of the SCEF program, it's 2108-04. Anybody want a quiz again later? I'll do acronyms and docket numbers. So maybe we'll do a door prize. Again, there's 6 years of competitive procurement per the legislation that will support up to 150 megawatts of new clean power generation in Connecticut. Subscriber organizations will receive a 20-year tariff term with their EDC in the service territory in which the project is located. And SCEP projects will result in credits that will applied to the bills participating electric customers at no cost to those customers. That point is about the shared clean energy recipients. There are bill credits for a low-income population of both Eversource and UI that will be the recipients of some bill credits from the production from most projects. The goals of Shared Clean Energy Facility is to allocate up to 25 megawatts of shared clean energy facilities in Connecticut and provide, again, low to moderate income organizations with bill credits from their production. Some key definitions. Yep, sorry, I'm on the next slide. Marcy, I move quick. Shared clean energy is a class 1 renewable energy source that generates electricity participating in the SCEF program. The subscriber organization is another term in this program. That's basically the owner and the operator of the SCEF facility. Subscribers are those customers that get the energy credit, and a tariff term agreement is the overlying agreement with the subscriber organization for the 20-year term. Yeah. Next slide. Effectively, this is functioning like it's providing, a long-term offtake again to provide financeability for a clean energy project, and the clean energy system owner will receive compensation from the EDC at their competitively bid price. This again is competitively bid. There are bid caps and there are bid preferences in this program. Projects can be, this little graphic here talks about the clean energy project is generating energy and renewable energy credits. They flow to the electric distribution company. Customers that are designated to receive a credit, the low to moderate income, will receive a 2.5 cent per kilowatt hour fixed monthly payment under their bill, and will pay the generator a rate, a 20-year fixed rate. And again, the prices that are down here for year 3, there are bid caps, because again, it's competitively procured, but for these are like 13.6 cents bid cap for standalone shared clean energy facilities, and for solar canopies and carports, which the Connecticut PURA is trying to provide incentive for, is a higher bid cap, is 15.533. Projects can be, so what's different about this one? I'm sorry, because I can go into the details, but what's different about shared clean energy compared to what we talked about on NRES is this is the opportunity for standalone projects that don't have load. Again, NRES was for projects that have load. This is the opportunity for projects that don't have existing load that want to provide clean energy into the grid and have a long-term contract. The window for participation is in the shared clean energy program. And there is a bit of, again, it's a competitive procurement. There are 6 years. We're in year 3 now, and we've had, to two completed procurements now. I was going to talk about whether or not they're successful or not, but I'm going to leave that to the side and let somebody else ask me that question. The next slide is a little bit about subscriber enrollment. Again, this is nothing that a developer has to do. This is part of the program as designed. If you think about shared clean energy in a lot of other states, people don't kind of understand what we're doing in Connecticut, because shared clean energy in concept, when you hear about it or you Google it, you think, oh, it's kind of to build a solar farm down the road at the vacant lot, and then we share it in our community here, and people can sign up and they buy a percentage or a subscriber. Connecticut chose to not do it like that for a number of reasons, and what they've chosen to do is allow a standalone project and allow a developer to receive a long-term contract, but also to monetize the energy that comes from the facility and provide a credit to a particular low to moderate income classes of customers, instead of, Jason's community or Christie's community or Harold's community. We just it's dedicated to a certain population for a number of other goals that the state has to provide energy affordability for low to moderate income customers. So there's this whole subscriber enrollment. It is nothing a developer has to do. And we pointed out here because it is a unique piece of shared clean energy, and it's not exactly what you think. Some developers or participants or others think it's kind of what they do in other states. It's different in Connecticut, and the utilities will be identifying the customers that will receive this credit, and they will receive that for the full 20-year term of the contract. Next slide. So again, it's 25 megawatts for 6 years. The systems can be up to 4 megawatts in size. Again, that's the difference with NRES. NRES can only be 2 megawatts. A shared clean energy facility can be 4. And they have to ultimately be a Connecticut Class 1 resource. So it's not just solar. Connecticut Class 1, for anybody who's counting, can be, in Connecticut, can be a fuel cell, can be solar, can be a variety of other technologies, anaerobic digestion, other technologies. So it's not just solar. It's selected based on competitive bid price and projects that will have 3 years for construction from PURA approval. So what would happen is we're running a procurement. The bids are due March 4th, I believe, in shared clean energy year 3. And then we will take our selections, we'll submit them to PURA. If PURA approves them, we'll send back an executed contract with a PURA approval date. And from that 3 years from that PURA approval date, you have to be constructed. If you're not constructed, you're subject to termination, which sounds harsh. I don't mean to be. It's in the legislation, I swear. Once generating, they'll receive the long-term contract payments. Next slide. Again, there's an 80% split of the 25 megawatts on an annual basis between Eversource and UI. That's based on our load share in Connecticut. And so Eversource has 20 megawatts a year to give out, and UI has 5. At the conclusion of year 6, based on that total, there could be up to 150 megawatts of available shared clean energy. Next slide. And again, this just summarizes some of the information I've already given, and it's very small text. So it must be, again, between 100 kilowatts and 4 megawatts in size, Class 1, located in the company's service territory. That means if you're in Eversource service territory, apply to Eversource. If you're in UI service territory, apply to UI, just for avoidance of doubt. You must be new construction with this program. And you cannot have previously received an LREC-ZREC contract or a prior SCEF. You can't kind of choose which program to be in. You have to kind of choose one, stay in your lane. There's some stuff on the right side, which is really small. You can't split. You can't, projects should be the size it is. You can't kind of be on one site and build 2 4-megawatt projects on one site. There's a bunch of program segmentation rules, as Brian mentioned before. This program also could be a bit confusing, so if you have any questions, there are Q&As and documents and lots of legalese to wade through. As we mentioned before, on the next slide, there is a price cap. There was a change of the pricing structure in the bid cap for year 3, and it goes down every year. DEEP makes a recommendation for the bid cap. Pura approved that. And if you want to participate in those dockets every year, Pura opens a docket to talk about these things, bid preferences, bid prices, those sorts of things. Again, the bid price cap for year 3 is 155.43 per megawatt hour. I know before I told you per kilowatt hour, it's the same. You just divide it between kilowatts and megawatts. So, those that for carports and canopies, and 136 for projects that are not located on solar carports or canopies. The next slide just summarizes some key documents, and I think those are hyperlinks. So if you share those, do share those slides so you guys can go into, you can look at the final decision from Pura in docket 210804. There's a year 3 RFP link in our DEEP's Appendix B. To that point, you have to submit, if you're going to participate in this program, you have to submit some information to DEEP as well as EDCs in the Shared Clean Energy Program, and that's about site control and some sloping conditions and some other experience and things that DEEP finds that we'll evaluate for participation. And then if you're selected, we'll contact you and we'll notify you via email that you've been selected. You have to return a tariff terms agreement and give us some responses and signatures, and then we proceed. I think that is our last slide. How are we doing? All right. Any questions on shared clean energy or NRES or anything else, Mark?
Yes, you alluded to differences between the Connecticut SCEF program and those in other states. And based on all the eligibility criteria and conditions, et cetera, it sounds like an incredibly bureaucratic process. Am I reading that incorrectly?
Do you mean clean energy development or program development or this program?
I can,
Yeah.
I'll take that, Christy, because I think the SCEF program in Connecticut is interesting, and it's following an evolution of really community solar program models that we are seeing in other states. I'm very familiar with kind of the history of the community solar programs in Massachusetts and virtual net metering there, which has been around for a long time, and there are a lot of projects that participate in it. But I think what Massachusetts has observed over that time period is that community solar developers, very understandably, have sought out participants that are the most credit-worthy and most stable. So that means it's been a program that's worked really well for municipalities, and those have been very attractive credits for solar project developers and financiers, as well as large commercial customers. But the model has really struggled to effectively enroll kind of residential customers, and in particular low-income residential customers. So I think what SCEF is trying to do is kind of make these savings opportunities ultimately more available to a wider range of customers, and leveraging kind of utility capabilities and utility customer information systems to help do that. So I appreciate that it does, there seem to be more layers of it. I'll say Massachusetts is going down a similar model to try to, again, facilitate low-income participation in community solar, because it's something that the state's been trying to do for 10 years and has not been as successful as they wanted to be at it.
Thank you.
Welcome. Mr. Hoffman.
Mr. Hoffman.
Your dad's not here yet.
So at the end of the NRES piece of this,
I think it was you who mentioned that there's going to be a lot of new information and a lot of things going into the bid. And I know that for the first 2 rounds of the SCEF bidding, there was a lot of post-bid back and forth about, did we get the right affidavit in? Was it signed by the right person? And people running to Pura and everything else. So has there been any thought given to what sort of post-bid cleanup is going to be permitted? Because what the end result of that is you've got good bids that are cheaper than some of the bids that get taken, but they have procedural defects associated with them. But the ratepayers are paying a little more. By the same token, rules is rules, and you don't want to give slipshod work the benefit of the doubt. So is there any thought given to how you're going to manage that, particularly with the new program?
Good question. I believe that Pura has tried to be clear in addressing the bid certification documentation, the executing or establishing site control. In fact, Pura just responded to a motion, I think on Wednesday, about some questions from the developer community about things like that, about providing bid certification documents, and for the EDCs, what we can accept. I would always say it is a challenge. That is one of the challenges for confirming eligibility, and certainly no one likes, denying or terminating projects, or disqualifying is the better term, for administrative purposes. And you're right, the Shared Clean Energy Program has had some challenges with those topics. I think Pura, by setting up the review process on an annual basis to review these programs and what's been successful or opportunities to modify the program rules on an annual basis, makes some sense, because I think they're trying to open the door for, let's see how things go, let's see what problems establish themselves, and what sorts of controls can be put into place. And so I'm looking forward to that. I know that there will be an evaluation and a question to us about what do we recommend modifications, and what have participants found have been challenges. And I think we welcome that discussion. Brian, anything to add?
I'd agree with everything that Christy said. I mean, I think generally speaking, we give bidders an opportunity to dot their I if that seems to be missing. Easy fixes that can be resolved through a quick email exchange are certainly not things that we want to disqualify an otherwise good application for, and I think fall within reasonable cure processes. And again, I will say, I'm sure we're going to continue to learn from this RFP, and there'll be changes in the next cycle. The other thing, though, that I would want to clarify, though, is that kind of fixing, administrative oversights in the preparation of the application is different from trying to kind of renegotiate the certain terms of the tariff, which is something we don't have discretion to do. Oftentimes you get a bidder that kind of says, hey, I have a great bid. I just need you to accept these 2 modifications for me to make it work. And oftentimes that's not something that we can do.
Thanks, Brian. Any other questions?
No, you did it right on time. So
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it. I'm going to have to run because I have a technical meeting I have to head to for Pura. But I appreciate you inviting me, and I've enjoyed myself. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you, Brian, for taking time out of storm duty to do this. Greatly appreciate it.
I'll take any excuse to step away from storm duty for a little bit. So thank you for having me. And
I won't tell folks you said that. I think we're at the break point in the agenda, so feel free to grab a second cup of coffee, and then
then we will come back with task force reports and the like.
It's really. Slide up his house here, so make sure we have.
All right, we're gonna bring the meeting back to order.
Yeah,
Go for it. Morning, welcome back. I want to introduce you guys to Wheezy, who was very gracious to take over the Energy Task Force. And with that, I leave it to you.
Thanks, Marcy. Thanks for having me. Thanks for trusting me with the Energy Committee, and hopefully everyone's got the slides. I can just jump right in. Background on me, I'm the State Policy Director for Dominion Energy. I cover all of New England, but of course focused on Connecticut. And before Dominion, I was with ISO New England, so I've got some updates on ISO to kind of round out my energy update. And I start first with an update on January. So it was cold and expensive. That's really the bottom line there. We saw colder than normal temperatures that caused higher demand for electricity across the entire region. And we saw much higher natural gas prices. And as you all know, we're heavily dependent on natural gas for power generation here in New England. So if there's an increase in natural gas prices, you are going to see an increase in wholesale energy prices. I've got a screenshot on the right. If you don't have the ISO to Go app, I really encourage you to get it, because if you're an energy nerd like me, you want to know exactly what the prices are at any one moment. And this is a snapshot from January 21st. And you can see prices, in most of the region, north of $200 a megawatt hour. That's very, very expensive. On a spring or fall day, you can see prices in the $20 megawatt hour range, $30 a megawatt hour range. So coincident with these higher natural gas prices and higher wholesale energy prices, we saw a lot of oil-fired generation on the system. So that kept energy prices quite high. I know ISO New England was very worried about fuel inventories in the region. So during the winter months, during the entire year, really, they have the ability to reach out to generators to make sure they have the fuel they need to meet their obligations and put power onto the grid. So they watched oil inventories trend down over the course of the month. And so that's always something ISO New England is watching, not only oil inventories, but making sure natural gas generators have nominated the gas they need to cover their day-ahead obligations. They're looking at LNG cargoes coming into Everett and Canaport. So it's often a very stressful time at ISO for the region and on the grid, because cold temperatures, like I said, usually means high demand for natural gas, price spikes in natural gas, and price spikes in wholesale energy. So yes, it was an expensive month. It was a $1.4 billion month in January. So that's up there. That's twice what it was the month before, December 2021, and almost triple what it was a year ago, so January 2021. So, I think there were a lot of other issues at play. Obviously, just high demand for natural gas globally, and that really had an impact here on New England. Real-time energy prices at the New England hub were 130. Average real-time energy prices, $139 a megawatt hour, day ahead at 142. A lot of these issues were actually discussed a couple weeks ago at the Energy and Technology Committee's forum on grid resilience and winter reliability. It was a fascinating forum. You had a woman who wrote a book, I think it's called Shorting the Grid, the Hidden Fragility of the Electric Grid. So she was just talking about not only the physical grid and some of the challenges we have here in New England, but also the policy grid. So there's just all these layers of state jurisdiction and federal jurisdiction. It's a pretty interesting book, so I recommend it. She kicked off the forum. Chairs Needleman and Arconti invited her to speak, having read the book, and thought that she'd be a good person to kind of set the table. ISO New England's president and CEO Gordon Van Wheely presented during that seminar. Commissioner Dykes presented, Chairperson Gillette presented, and then the president of the New England Power Generators Association also presented. So take a look at that forum. I have the links there if you're interested, and then all the data comes from ISO New England's COO report, which are posted monthly if you're interested in stats on energy prices. So that was kind of the look region-wide and what we probably all felt and what we might see in power supply rates down the road. Very, very possible we'll see those continue to be high in the wintertime. On the next slide, we've got the comprehensive energy strategy. So Connecticut Deep has kicked off the comprehensive energy strategy process. It's the 2022 strategy. I believe the last one they issued was in 2018. So they're required to develop a CES every 4 years. I feel like that was every 3 years for a while there, and then it was just happening every 4, and so they changed the statute. So
Now it'll be 5.
So it'll be 5 soon enough. It'll be 5 soon enough, but it's a massive document, and they're required to do one so frequently, and an integrated resources plan so frequently that I don't know how they produce these reports. I mean, it's a lot of work, I'm sure. It of course examines future energy needs in the state, identifies opportunities to reduce costs for ratepayers, ensure reliable energy availability, and mitigate the impacts of Connecticut's energy use. And then end of last year, you probably saw Governor Lamont's executive order, which also directed DEEP to fold in some other topics into the CES. So a set of strategies to provide for more affordable heating and cooling for Connecticut residents and businesses, achieve reductions in GHG emissions from residential buildings and industrial facilities to meet the GWSA mandates. And at the bottom, you'll see what those are. I'm sure you're all familiar. And then lastly, to improve the resilience of the state's energy sector to extreme weather events, fuel commodity price spikes, and other disruptions. I think also a reaction to what we've been seeing this past winter with very high prices, high price spikes in fuel and fuel commodity price spikes, and then so too in wholesale energy prices, given we're very dependent on those fuels to produce electricity here in New England. Back in January, they issued a notice of proceeding. On the next slide, you'll see, and a scoping meeting that was held yesterday. And some of you tuned into that, I believe. It was really just to provide an overview on the structure, the schedule, and the topics that they plan to cover in the comprehensive energy strategy. And there's an opportunity for public comment, but they're also accepting written comments through March 3rd. So get those comments in if you're interested. And then a quick update on the Pura front on the next slide there. So their grid modernization dockets continue. One I'm just highlighting here is their building blocks of resource adequacy and clean electric supply docket. So this is an interesting one to watch. They're going to take a look at all of the contracted energy they have here in Connecticut. So that includes, of course, nuclear power, that includes some offshore wind that will be coming, and then a number of other PPAs that have been called for via statute over the last probably since 2013 or even 2011. So a lot of contracted energy on the books, and should we be applying it towards retail electric supply? Should we continue to settle it and reconcile it on the delivery side of the bill? So I think they're just going to take a kind of holistic look at all of the contracted energy here in Connecticut and what's the best way to use that. So we'll be watching that. There are technical meetings today and next Friday. So that's what I'm going to be tuning into in about an hour. And that's just really getting started as well. So I'll finish with a forward capacity auction update. I'm not sure if folks follow the forward capacity auctions that ISO New England administers each year. Billions of dollars were settled on that one day. So it's a pretty big auction to watch. And this one was rather interesting. So I'm sure everyone has been following the debate around Killingly Energy Center. That was the big news this auction. So last Monday, ISO New England administered their forward capacity auction to procure capacity needed to meet electricity in the 2025 to 2026 timeframe. So ISO New England, of course, it runs daily energy markets to make sure we have energy day to day. They also run a capacity market to make sure we're going to have the installed generating capacity in 3 years' time. And they can make decisions about, oh, wow, we need to accelerate some transmission upgrades now that we've just learned that this generator is going to retire in 3 years. So they want to have a good sense for how much generation is installed here in the region in 3 years' time so that we have adequate supply of electricity. So they just ran the 16th auction for that time frame. The Friday before, there was a DC Circuit Court of Appeals order that said, ISO New England, you must include Killingly Energy Center in the existing supply stack for that auction. ISO New England was going into the auction thinking it did not need to do that because it had just terminated Killingly's capacity supply obligations and disqualified it from participating in the auction. That was because they were not meeting critical milestones associated with that project. And so just before the auction was run, they terminated their CSO, they terminated their ability to participate in the auction, and then the DC Circuit Court of Appeals 48 hours before the auction was run said, just a minute, let's send this back to FERC for rehearing and go ahead and include them in the auction. And so ISO New England was a little, they were scrambling. It was probably a very stressful weekend before that auction was run. I know a lot of folks were hoping they would just delay the auction to get a little bit more clarity. But instead, ISO New England ran the auction and basically calculated the results, and they have unique prices and quantities cleared for both Killingly in the supply stack and Killingly out of the supply stack. So that's the first time ISO New England has ever done that. It's interesting to see how it'll play out. Now this is all back at FERC for a rehearing request that NTE Connecticut has made, and ISO New England is pressing FERC to really act on this quickly so that we've got some clarity. ISO New England usually files the results, the final results of the forward capacity auctions by the end of February. It's unlikely they're going to be able to do that this year. And they've already filed in exigent circumstances filing with FERC to try and delay some of the timelines associated with some of the deadlines associated with FCA 17. So as soon as an auction ends, ISO New England is starting to plan for the next one in the next February. So things are a little bit crazy in ISO world right now, especially associated with the capacity auctions. And we'll just have to see how this one plays out. So,
how does Killingly end up being built then? So FERC can force that to happen, or how does that happen? Everybody else seems to be against it now.
Well, if FERC, they'll have to do this rehearing, will act on the rehearing request by NTE Connecticut. If they ultimately decide ISO New England terminated your CSO, your capacity supply obligations fairly, and disqualified you fairly, that might be the final word on the issue. If you don't have a capacity supply obligation, you're not going to get built here in.
No financing. Right.
You would not get financing.
Yeah, you got signing council approval. If you had an open check, you could build it, but
Right.
absent your CSO, no bank's gonna get behind that, the scale of the cost.
That's right. And there's already kind of an issue with the facility and its ability to post some financial assurance relating to the project. So there are some other things that are getting triggered for Killingly that will make it an uphill battle for that resource. We'll see what happens at FERC. Maybe that can get further challenged, perhaps. But without a capacity supply obligation, which ISO New England has just terminated, they cleared actually, they have 2 capacity supply obligations from previous auctions. Those have been terminated, and then they were not allowed or disqualified from participating in FCA 16. They have, ISO New England ran it with them in and out of the supply stack. So technically they obtained a CSO in this auction, but if everything comes down on the side of ISO New England and the way FERC originally ruled on this, everything will get kind of taken away, and that project will be very, very challenged from a financing perspective.
Everybody except the lawyers.
Right.
I know. Right. So.
Any other questions for Wheezy? Wheezy, terrific job. Welcome.
Thank you.
Very nice maiden voyage. I think next up is Ashley and John.
Well, it's good to be here today. I'm John Blair, Associate Counsel. I cover the energy side of E2. I'm here with Ashley Zane, who covers the environment side of E2. Yeah, we're at that time of year where things are real. There's a lot of bills being filed. We have hearings already being set. It's a short session, so we don't have a lot of time to get the work done as normally we do. What we're going to go over today is kind of a few of the bills that have come out to date and some of the concepts that have come out. And I would guess at the outset, what I would say is a lot of these bills, we get feedback from members on that they want us to jump in on, but we don't always know how important it may be to your individual interest. So we encourage you that what we're going to try and do through Marcy is provide you guys regular updates on bills that come forward, on when hearings are happening, also providing you committee agendas as well as public hearing agendas to keep us all on the same page. And if when you receive that information, you don't see that we're tracking the right bills or we're missing a bill, please pick up the phone and call either one of us. So that was just kind of a general announcement. And I'll jump into the energy update. As I said, public hearings are already being set. There's a public hearing next Thursday. The Energy and Technology Committee is hosting that. They've come out with a number of bills and concepts that they've raised. I'll go over the bills that exist, and I'll touch on the concepts. So all of the bills that I'm about to go through, though, however, doesn't necessarily mean we're tracking all of them. I wanted to provide them today, so you got a flavor of what the Energy and Technology Committee is going to be considering next Thursday. One of the bills we are tracking is SB 10, which is the climate change bill. That's the governor's bill of going to zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2040. He wants to codify that into statute. We have consistently suggested that maybe that ought to be a target rather than actually codified in statute. So that's been a consistent message from CBIA. The second bill here is Senate Bill 90. This is a procurement authority bill for the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. Senate Bill 91 is an act requiring the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection to report on battery storage technology. Battery storage, I think, could be a hot topic and discussed greatly this session. I'm not going to go through all of these, but I'll touch on a couple others.
Battery storage or energy storage?
Battery storage, Senate Bill 91 on battery storage technology. SB 92 is permitting a 10-year contractual periods for transportation of school children in zero-emission school buses. The governor has discussed this himself a little bit. I know Ashley's following that issue pretty closely. Senate Bill 93 is the commercial property assessed for clean energy program. Senate Bill 94 is an act concerning certain modifications to gas pipeline processes. And HB 5116 is requiring the creation of utility company tree planting funds. And HB 5117 is an electric vehicle charging stations, which is also an issue that the governor has come out heavily on, that they're going to look to put charging stations everywhere they can. If you drive by the Department of Transportation on the Burlington Turnpike, you can see them all lined up there now. Kind of a unique thing to see as you drive by. The last bill that has come out that it's really an issue that Ashley's been working diligently on with some of our members, which is HB 5118. and Act concerning waste management and aerobic digestion bill. And then there's a number of bills and concepts. I'm not going to go through each one of those. These will eventually become bills, the concepts here. If there's anything in the concepts, please, we will send them out as bills eventually. Please let us know if you have any thoughts on them. Again, Weezy, it's great having you today, sharing, and welcome aboard. Good to have you here. Ashley.
All right, so switching over to the environment side, starting out with the release-based working group, the phase 2 of the subcommittee should be reporting to the larger working group by March 31st. That's the goal, and so far all of the committees are relatively on track to meet that goal. It should also be noted that in the Commerce Committee, not the Environment Committee, they put in a bill that will require DEEP to share a draft of the regulations for the release-based working group prior to posting on the e-reg system. So we're excited about that. We'll be submitting testimony and I'll be testifying in person virtually to that committee supporting it. So if you would also like to submit testimony, I can draft something up for you. Just either give me a call, shoot me a text, or reach out through Marcy and we can get you on that list or just submit written testimony, whatever you would prefer. Moving over to the Environment Committee, there's a few bills that have been raised so far. What hasn't been raised yet is the governor's bill, which would shift us over to the California medium and heavy duty vehicle emission standards. We're going to be monitoring that and also working with the Trucking Association. So stay tuned. That hasn't been raised yet, but it likely will be. There's a lot of EPR. As many of you know, there has been one bill in the past regarding extended producer responsibility. This year, they've decided to break them out into 3 different bills regarding cylinders, tires, and packaging. So there's 3 separate bills, so the bill numbers are in the notes. There is also the use of polystyrene products that's geared towards businesses. They want to do a complete ban by July 1 of 2024. So we're going to be talking to the Restaurant Association. And again, if this is something that you have concern with or your manufacturing companies that you work with have a concern about, please let us know. There's also climate resiliency is of course coming up this year. That's a big issue for Senator Cohen. So we're going to be working with her on some of those bills. And as John mentioned in the Energy and Technology 5118, an act concerning waste management and anaerobic digestion, what this does is it establishes a new account, the Sustainable Materials Management account within the general fund, with funds raised by the alternative compliance payment for Class 2 renewables. And what this fund will do is support solid waste reduction in the state through grants, loans, technical assistance, consulting, waste characterization for municipalities, nonprofit organizations, and regional waste authorities. It's not limited to those entities, but that's what's specifically listed in the bill. And then Section 6 allows the DEEP Commissioner to obtain proposals from anaerobic digestion facilities to produce biogas from farm-generated organic waste and source-separated organic materials. So that's one that we're watching in Energy and Technology. In terms of bills, Environment also is currently having a meeting right now where they're raising additional proposals. Nothing huge that is on today's agenda that we're concerned about, except for, revisions to environmental related statutes. You never know what could get put in one of those suckers, so we're just going to monitor it. And then there is a public hearing on the 25th that has the EPR bills that I just mentioned for cylinders, tires, and packaging. And then there's also the polystyrene bill as well. Again, that's Friday, February 25th at 10 a.m. So if any of those are problematic or that you want us to get behind, just let me know.
Questions for Ashley or John?
Marc.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Mark. Any buzz about repeal of the highway use fee?
I don't believe so. And then I also know that they're not bringing up TCI, but I will double check and let you know.
And I'd just like to go back to SB 102, which is the bill with respect to requiring DEEP to provide the working group with a copy of the proposed regulations for the space remediation. Maybe Ashley can speak a little bit more to that, but the background is that DEEP has indicated that at the end of the working group process where they take in all the information and all the concept papers and all the work, that they did not plan to share a complete integrated draft of the proposed regulations with the working group for any feedback, that they were just going to go to notice. They were going to take it all, craft their own regulation, and then notice it for comment. So that got a lot of buzz. And
Yeah, so the original public act that allows DEEP to establish this working group to promulgate the regulations, it didn't require that DEEP share the final regulations with the working group. And I will say the working group, for anyone who isn't aware, does have 60 people on it. So I think there's some hesitancy from DEEP to share their draft regulations with 60 people and then kind of getting roadblocked or getting too much feedback. But Chairs Hartley of the Commerce Committee and Senator Cohen was concerned that the working group wasn't going to be able to see a draft proposal of the regulations. So that's why they're putting this bill in. Additionally, based off of how the working group subcommittees, there's been 2 phases. They've kind of been operating off of a waterfall methodology for creating the regs. So each subcommittee has been working in a silo and creating their own assumptions on what they're working on and also what the next step in the subcommittees are going to be working on. So there's really no regulation or process in totality at this point. So we think it's important for the working group to be able to see the regs as a whole and not just within their various subcommittee forms.
okay, what's going on?
So, the infrastructure, federal bipartisan infrastructure law was signed by the president in November. Whole lot of things, there's a lot of money in it, but there is $9.5 billion targeted towards the hydrogen industry. $8 billion of that is for hydrogen hubs. Legislation says that there shall be no fewer than 4, and indications are that DOE has an appetite, given that much money, to assign more than 4. And expectations are that the solicitation process will involve the release of the, I'll call it the RFP, I guess, solicitation, late May, a few weeks after the end of our state's legislative session. Now, my understanding that House Chair David Arconti, intends to take up a hydrogen roadmap, and he's raised a concept to that on the agenda for next week, maybe on the agenda for March 3rd. The hydrogen roadmap is not likely to be terribly specific or substantive relative to promotions of Connecticut into a hydrogen hub. Rather, it will set the table for legislation that might come next year, more around a hydrogen roadmap to promote the industry. I raised this because, Connecticut doing something legislatively to make its voice heard in support of a Northeast hydrogen hub, not a Connecticut hydrogen hub, but a Northeast hydrogen hub that might be, New Jersey, New York, and all in New England, would be helpful. It does not have to involve money. Legislative resolution that indicates that Connecticut considers itself important in this area and is excited about the promise of, supporting the hydrogen industry would be a really good idea. I think the Fuel Cell Coalition is intending to make that an ask. We're in discussions with the leaders of the Energy Committee, and every reason to think the governor will be supportive, and maybe they'll do something of his own. But sure would be nice to have CBIA at our backs on this.
Thanks, Derek.
Sure.
Okay, anything else? I think we're running a little bit behind.
We're good.
You're good? So next up is water quality, and Logan, you're up, and I'm turning the ball back away. I don't know why you like it. Good, all right.
Switch closer to the camera. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Thank you for joining us. You've met Tom Salamano, my new partner in crime. Welcome, Tom.
Thank you.
And maybe we'll start with one of the things that our membership voiced as a concern regarding permit fees, right? And
So-
possibility of that coming to fruition.
So under the DEP agency proposal to the legislature, they identified an opportunity, perhaps a need, to establish the authority to set annual fees for general permits. The department identified as the shift is going from a lot of individual permits to general permits, that they're projecting a $1.5 million deficit in their budget. So they're identifying an opportunity to change the statute so they could have an annual fee. Right now, it's written as if it be could be as much as $1,000 per year for that annual fee. It's early, who knows where it's gonna go. For me, I think the bigger concern for the department is just the evolution as people retire and move on. Yes, there's that budgetary shortfall, but with things like the fees, but I think it's gonna be the brain drain as a lot of people start retiring, and more to follow on that. So
Yeah, so
stay tuned.
this might depend on what type of permit you're holding.
Correct.
Maybe this might not apply to all of them, but it's something we want to watch closer and report back to you in the future. Another thing to keep in mind, it's the stormwater associated with commercial activity. That's due to expire in May.
Correct.
Right, so we're trying to get more information from DEP to you on, what's the latest and what the plan is with regards to that permit, and hopefully we'll have it, yeah, maybe by next month. Other than that, there's not much, as you'll notice from the report, else to report on. That's new. For those of you who are considered significant water users, the reports on your water usage are due to MDC this month. And then on maybe diverging to hazardous material storage, tier 2 reports are due, just a reminder, March 1st, as well as the biannual reports, sort of in the next committee. If you're a large quantity generator of hazardous waste, those are due as well. So this is kind of short and quick.
Trying to get back on schedule.
Right. Any other questions, anybody, or?
Stay tuned till next month. Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome. And now, Jason,
Okay. Yep, Jason Farron, Clean Energy, I'm the new Air Quality Chair. I will be brief, as we are all about to find out. I am no Dave Crutchko. So I'm only going to go through the things that have been updated or changed since we last met or since was last reported. There's on page 1 there, the handout, there is an Ozone Transport Commission meeting scheduled for March 8th. If that is of interest to you, the topic is municipal waste combustors. It's a virtual meeting. There's a link there for registration and participation. Moving on, EPA in the March or the February 3rd SIPRAC meeting, EPA Region 1, Susan Lancy did a presentation. They have added a hazardous air pollutant to the list of hazardous air pollutants. It's 1-bromopropane. The impact of that is that facilities now need to account for those potential emissions in their calculations. And if those potentials are high enough, it could potentially cause a source to become a Title V major source. That is effective immediately as of the listing, which was February 4th. The listing will precede regulation. They don't expect regulation until sometime this year, proposal and finalization sometime next year. Stop me if there are questions. Otherwise, moving on, the other update from SIPRAC was with respect to the annual emission statement. It's been emailed out to the sources to which they are subject. That new HAP is in there. There's a new emission estimation technique for gas storage tanks. Particulate matter reporting needs to be distinctly reported. I'm not going to get into the details of that. If you have a power plant with duct burners, they now want the duct burner emissions called out and reported separately for reasons that I don't fully understand. I did give them an earful at the SIPRAC meeting that I did not think EMIT was the place to gather data, which is basically what this is. But in their defense, they did a lot of the work up front. They sent out a spreadsheet to me. It was pretty much plug and play from there. So I apologize for my comment at SIPRAC for anybody who heard it or read it. It's not as bad as I thought it was going to be. That's due by March 1st. GPLP reporting, reminder to those subject, only report your reporting year 2021 data. There was something that I'm not overly familiar with, that 2020 data was omitted and they thought maybe I had to report it this year. You don't. Use the section 33 forms that were emailed out to you, or they're available on the website. You cannot submit this through EMIT, their emissions reporting system. It can't handle it, so you need to email the reports to the email address listed there. You don't need to submit a hard copy. Contact Jared Millay if you have questions. And finally, they are in the process of repealing Section 4 of the air regulations, which covers continuous emission monitoring and opacity monitoring. Public comment period closed. They did get some comments from EPA and the regulated community. They're working their way through those. And the next step is to propose the final regulation and shoot it off to the Attorney General's office. If you have SEMS, continuous emission monitors, previous version of Section 4 was brief and really only focused a lot on opacity for some reason. They've expanded it. You'll now be reporting and talking about all sorts of pollutant continuous emission monitoring and reporting on them. So pay attention to that if it's applicable. Questions? Hearing none. Thank you.
Just for that next month, we're all coming. All right, and last but in no way least, Harold Blinderman and Marc Boblin for the waste task. And Mark is running away.
Where'd he go?
He's out of here.
Well, Mark has props, so I'll be quick, get out of his way. Because I know how we all like a nice show and tell. So release reporting regulations. The LRC met in December and rejected without prejudice the proposed spill reporting regulations. The LRC and the LCO, Legislative Commissioner's Office, took issue with some broad language and some of the provisions having to do with very broad language like minor incidental spills, inconsequential or small amounts of quantities, and took issue with that type of language that they said was subjective when these spill regulations are supposed to be more, to give you more certainty. So DEEP went back, revised the regulations in part by taking out some of that language, and has resubmitted those to the LRC. They are up for review on the 22nd. If they go through absent an extension, DEEP has 14 days, or by my calculations, until March 8th to, if they are approved, to submit those as final regulations to the Secretary of State's office. That's number one. Turning to page 2, release-based remediation group development. Ashley touched on the workings of the working group. They continue to meet. DEEP is forming an ad hoc team from its working group members to review the need for additional guidance and forms to support the regulations when they do get drafted and go through the legislative review process for adoption, whenever that may be. The ad hoc team, DEEP plans to form the ad hoc team and meet the first week of March. And DEEP also launched, as indicated in the materials, a new web page, which has identified all the issues that has been identified through the process that may require further review and further consideration. And the last item that I'll mention, sorry.
Point of all of that. DECD was supposed to be code-sharing that activity. DECD has been absolutely AWOL for the last couple of meetings. So what was supposed to be a joint environmental and economic development exercise has become solely an environmental exercise. Be afraid, be very afraid. Now back to you, Harold.
Okay. The last item that I have on page 5 is that consistent with Executive Order 21-3, DEEP's in the process of forming the Connecticut Environmental Justice Council. Nominations are being accepted through the 25th of February. The links are in the information is on page 5 of the task force report. And with that, knowing how all of you are waiting for the props, I'm going to turn this over to Mark. Thank you.
Thank you, Harold. Just to follow up on Jason's comment about the March 8th OTC meeting on municipal waste combustors, I believe this is the second of 3 meetings, and it's the Ozone Transport Commission considering changes to the MACT regulations, maximum achievable control technology regulations, particularly for nitrogen oxides. And so there will be a 3rd meeting after which the group is likely to come up with proposals for changing emission standards. So the current standard is 180 parts per million, I believe. And many of the New England states already have lower limits, but it's possible we'll see some regulatory changes in that area. I wanted to make a note about PFAS. You know, if at the rate we're going in this organization, we'll be generating hazardous waste before too long because it's all over everybody's reports. And as we all know, it's all over the environment and it's picking up in terms of testing, analysis, regulatory activity. EPA is taking a look at designating certain PFAS compounds under the RCRA statutes, also as hazardous air pollutants. They're looking to hire additional staff when the new budget is adopted, the new federal budget. Connecticut has been very active testing wastewater treatment facilities, public water supplies, closed landfills, and other states in New England are doing the same, including testing at composting facilities. Apologies. We locked out Derek.
Yeah, I don't see a problem.
The DEEP did run out of money for their AFFF recovery program, and they received additional bonding dollars to continue that effort and also clean out fire trucks. So they've hired 2 contractors to pump out the fire trucks formerly containing AFFF and clean them. And this is being tested down to the parts per trillion levels. So I think we still have through DPH a health advisory limit of 70 parts per trillion. I don't know if there have been any changes to that, but stay tuned. I think it's likely to happen in the near future. In addition to testing water, sludge, compost, landfills, I think air testing is on the horizon as well. Let's see. So I did want to spend a few minutes talking about general permits, which is a topic that came up in Wojtek's and Tom's presentation, and hence the props. And I communicated with Ashley about concerns I had about a new general permit. It's the Commercial Recycling General Permit Appendix H. So the general permit itself is 26 pages. Appendix H is 16 pages. And to help explain this, we have in my left hand one set of items. And as a disclaimer, I will make every effort to avoid referring to brand names as I demonstrate these items. And in my other left hand, I have other materials. And so there's a door prize, and Christy Prescott alluded to this earlier. She didn't know that there is a door prize. So the first person to correctly answer which of these two bags contains materials subject to the general permit is eligible to win the contents of that particular bag. So I'll start on the left side with items. So every breakfast should begin with a leprechaun. So I don't know if this is familiar to you all, but a very famous product. So then we also have snack food, Super Bowl famous, well-known product. And then age-old standard, known to many of us as children, familiar product. And lastly, skimping a little bit, but the diet version of a commonly known beverage.
They look like they all go together to me.
Well, they could, yes. Now, so now this is where Harold's license is going to come into play, because I need to have a professional certify the contents of these two jars, which contain items, okay, eggshells, banana peels, coffee grounds. Would you like to verify? So this is the official confirmation.
Verified.
Okay. Okay, so.
Verified.
So the door prize, the question is, which of these items require a general permit? No, wrong answer.
Just,
These items do not.
just stuff in the jar.
Yeah. So you can go to a grocery store and buy unlimited quantities of these items. But if you transfer, process, consolidate, or depackage these items, you are required to have a general permit. And this is referred to as streamlining. So with that, I'll entertain any questions. And let's see, Lee, you got the question right.
Yeah, but
Okay.
I'll go to the coffee ground later.
No, but you have to share the good and plenty.
Harold, you get to keep those.
Okay, that's my own.
No questions.
I guess my question is why? What's the policy / regulatory purpose for it?
That is a really excellent question, Lee, and one day I may have an answer to that question, but I'm very far from that point now. Ashley, I don't know, do you have any comments?
Okay.
Well, thank you all.
Thanks, everybody. Remember, next month, Hartford Club, Marcy has already sent parking directions. They were attached to the agenda that you got an email this week. If you don't know where it is and you don't know where to park, but the parking is free. So feel free to drive over there. And look forward to seeing you this time next month.